Welcome back. Today we're going to look about newspaper as a mass medium. But before that, I want to quickly have a recap of what we discussed in our previous meeting. We looked at various aspects of book. The first book that was published in North America was in 1640, and that was called the Bay Psalm Book. And as of now, there are about 11 copies. And in I think around 2014, it was sold for a record $14.2 million. So that's how it's so precious, because it was a milestone in the field of book publishing. And we looked at books from the three lenses: how books are profit centered, how technological changes has affected production, delivery, and distribution, and third is how book affects, like, politics, society, and culture. And we looked at how books are profit centered, because earlier the profitability in books were the physical sales of the book, physical sales of the copy. But right now the publishers are looking at subsidiary rights, where they're looking at the profitability of marketing books on other platforms like audiobooks and ebooks and translations and foreign rights and aspects such as souvenirs and marketing the characters and handbags and all the other stuff that can be linked. We are looking at the Hollywoodization of the book industry, where they're looking at potential movie production out of books that's being published, and also books that can be marketed as video games and stuff like that. So they're looking at multiple avenues to make money from the sales of book itself. So that's how we are looking at book from the publishing industry point of view. And also we looked at how the big five, that Pearson, Random Elsevier, Walter Knowles, and Random Publishing, they're pretty much dominating the book industry, and none of them are based in the United States. And we also looked at some of the important aspects of how the technology has affected the sales of books. We looked at how the internet sales of books has actually resulted in the downfall of many retail bookstores. We saw Borders was announced bankruptcy and it was closed down, and Barnes and Nobles is a only chain of bookstores that is there right now in this country. And we are looking at how stuff like audiobooks and ebooks are changing the way things are being done. We looked at right now about 30% of sales with regard to books is towards the e-copies. And we also looked at how the print on demand is fast catching up, and a lot of people are trying to kind of use this concept of pod. And we also looked at the espresso book machine, where it can book where it can print and bind 400 or 300 pages in about like less than 3 to 4 minutes. And this is some of the things that we're looking at, how technology is affecting its the production, delivery, and distribution as well. And we also looked at the concept of Nook and tablets and Kindle, that's very popular for people to spend a lot of time accessing books online. So and also we have looked at the content of books as well, where I just wanted you to look at the link where you can analyze the content, how it has evolved. Because in certain areas, in certain part of the period, in certain period there are certain content or types of book that's very popular. And I just want to also look at the example of looking at the top three bestsellers and looking at how it's connected with the top publishing agencies. For instance, John Grisham's Camino Island is published by Doubleday, but actually Doubleday parent organization is Random House. So we are looking at, maybe for the common man, they don't understand, well, Doubleday is another company, but it's all kind of interconnected. And this big five pretty much dominate the entire book publishing industry. And the book as a mass media, and not every one of them are based outside the United States. So those are some of the unique things that you can think about books. And also I want you to have a very critical understanding of how to look at mass media from these three lenses. I think that's a very good healthy habit. From every news media or any media that we're going to discuss, try to look at the media from these three framework, from these three lenses. That can be very very useful in applying or looking at critically of these various mass media. So before that, I want to briefly give you an heads up. You will be having your first term exam on July 14th, and it will cover chapters 1 to 5. And the structure is, you will have about 10. It can be multiple choice, true or false, fill in the blanks, and short answers. And the short answers will be about 5, and each short answers carries about 12 points. So it basically graded for 100 points. And I'm sure if you really pay close attention to what's being said in the class, and you read all the chapters, I think it should be a walk in the park. So don't worry about that, as long as you pay close attention to what's being said. So moving on to the topic, today's agenda is basically we're going to look up the trends and convergence in journalism, especially with regard to newspapers and how things are changing with regard to newspapers. But before that, I think I just want to kind of briefly talk about how it actually all started. And these are the possible questions you'll be expecting by the end of the class presentation. But before that, I just wanted to just kind of open up, okay, and think of what are the possible uses of a newspaper. What do you think the use of a newspaper is? And when was the last time you read news from a newspaper? For instance, I think newspaper can be used for many aspects. Because to put things in perspective, I think the first newspaper was printed in Great Britain during the 1650s, but the first newspaper that was published in the United States was in 1690, and that was it only lasted only one edition. And for a long time, from 1690 till about the early part of the 20th century, newspaper was the only medium that catered for news and information for this country. So practically people who are looking for facts and information on what's happening around the world, newspaper was the only medium where people could access information. So it was definitely a great commodity at one point in time, and the newspaper was in great demand, and a lot of people actually tried to make good market or marketability from newspapers, but then its potential was really not that very used, but it was actually used after the advent of radio and television, because it was finding ways to adapt itself. But for almost 300 years plus, newspaper was the sole medium that catered to news and information for our country. And if you look at the possible uses of newspaper, it can be possibly endless, because it's basically to kind of get access to information about what's happening. And in terms of public affairs, so what is the latest development in terms of politics? What are the policy level changes? We are talking about healthcare, what it means for you and me and the common man, and how it can affect us, by if we're going to make any kind of changes, if you have some existing conditions, or what happens to that, and how we are able to get another doctor, and how we are able to pay the bills. So this definitely matters, and the newspapers is a great platform where they talk about all these issues in detail and why that matters for you and me. And some people read newspaper just for relaxation. You go to a doctor's office or anywhere, you just kind of grab a newspaper and see what's just happening around us. And sometimes newspaper is even considered to be a prestige. For instance, if you see someone with a Wall Street Journal, definitely your attitude towards him will be a little different, because you'll know that this guy is kind of is more oriented towards what's happening in the world of finance and all the kind of stuff. So sometimes it can also make a statement that if you're a reader of New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you'll be kind of considered a little bit sophisticated. and also for social contact, because you might ask like what's the social aspect to it, because you will know a lot of things that's happening around your neighborhood. You want some classified, you want to get hold of someone in the area, you want some people, or so many other things that you can connect with in terms of the stores, in terms of some selling or buying stuff. So that's a great way, and also it's a very important tool because newspaper is still relevant. Maybe it's not the first go to for news and information, but still it has a relevance in our society, and that's what we're going to see in detail. And also, the other uses of newspaper is sometimes you use it in a trash can so as to see if there is any leak or something. If you're actually using grocery or something in the desk drawer, you will put it under the spice rack. So there are other uses of newspaper where it's recycled for multi-purpose, but that's in a very kind of a humor, so don't take that seriously. So let's move on to the next topic. Okay, so as I told you, the first newspaper was published in 1690 by Benjamin Harris, and this was again considered to be very important because what happened was when Benjamin Harris published it, people were kind of the governor was not very happy with that, and he wanted to shut down the newspaper, and he did achieve. So the first newspaper also as the credibility or as the name for being the first newspaper that was suppressed by the government. So it was again a very important newspaper, even though it didn't see any many editions, but it still tried to kind of get the feel out in the market that people wanted a forum so as to showcase what's happening with the government. And what happened was the government was very strict, and if there was any newspaper that was published, they had to go through the government. And that's the second the newspaper, which is called the Boston Newsletter. It was published by authority, which means the newspaper has to approach the government, get their license, and then it was published. So basically you'll be nothing but a puppet of the government, and you won't write anything that might put the government in a bad image with the public. So that's what happened. So the Boston Newsletter is technically a newspaper, but then it was published by authority. But the first newspaper which was published without this authority tag was the New England Current, because this wanted to tell the people that we are not a puppet in the hands of the government. We want to kind of serve the public, so they are the one we are to trying to serve and not the government. And this lasted about like 5 years, and again James Franklin is credited for laying the foundation of free press in this country. So again, this is again a very important milestone, and again it took a lot of years. There's a lot of development that happened over the period of 300 years, but that's a big story altogether. But you should understand that newspaper pretty much dominated the news and information in this country for almost 300 years. So my next question is there a national newspaper in United States of America? Well, there is no such thing as national newspaper, but there are three largest newspapers that's in circulation in the United States. The number one is USA Today, number two is Wall Street Journal, and number three is New York Times. So these are the three top largest circulated newspapers. And again, let's look at the importance of these newspapers in detail. So the number one newspaper right now is considered to be the USA Today, and the reason is that it has a circulation of about 2 million, and New York Times has about again about 2 million, and Wall Street Journal has about 1.3 million circulation. So again, followed by Los Angeles Times and New York Post. But why does USA Today is so popular is because when USA Today was launched in 1982, it actually, a lot of people were making fun about this newspaper. It was called, I think it was called Mech paper, because it was serving the lowest common denominator of the society, where people just want to know what's happening. It was very short, because prior to that every newspaper had like in-depth extensive article on certain issues, but this particular paper only served for the consumers, where they want to know what was happening. It was very short, lively and upbeat. And also the thing is, they used a lot of infographics and a lot of photographs so as to make it very lively. And also they also wrote articles about popular culture, which was missing in mainstream newspapers, because they were talking about some of the things that was like, that we talk about in our day-to-day lives, that was given prominence in USA Today. And right now you see this is the number one newspaper in terms of circulation. But the point is, in Shirley Bayaji, it gives a completely a different circulation figures. It's because how things change in the last few years. So try to keep in mind the circulation changes, and the book mentions different figures, and the recent figures are completely different. And this is a screenshot of USA Today. As you can see, they give prominence for photographs, and they also try to kind of talk about all the some of the major stuff which is things is important. Florida winners in 1.6 billion Powerball to be announced. I think they're trying to kind of understand what is something that people will like. Lindsey Vonn does pull-ups wearing body paint. I think that definitely that is, it's not a newsworthy item, but then it's kind of made it to the top page. And also you can see they have also made sure that's a kind of a space for ads. And again, they're trying to kind of promote their online concept, where you can subscribe now, and you can just for 3 months you can access all the content for $25. And look at all the captions and all that. I mean, this is what I think is making USA Today popular. And again, USA Today is a company that is founded by it's actually part of Gannett. As you know, Gannett is a chain. It had a lot of newspapers across this country, and USA Today is published in almost 50 states, and also it is published in some other countries too. So USA Today has got its own big chunk of audience and readers. And the second popular newspaper is again New York Times. Times is more than a paper, because I think it's a kind of a lifestyle choice for many, because when we say Times, it invariably refers to New York Times. That's the impact of New York Times. And there have been a number of research how New York Times is it has got such clout, not only among readers but also among policy level decision makers as well. So definitely I think New York Times is still a kind of not only reaches a large number of population, but also it is definitely as a god of lot of political clout as well. And another thing is I want to mention is there are newspapers that are even semi-weeklies, weekly newspapers and daily newspapers. So a newspaper to be considered daily, it must be published 5 times a week. And again, New York Times has been in news lately for many reasons, good and bad, but they're also trying their best to reach out to more customers. Look at the screenshot from the New York Times. As you can see, it's completely different from what we just saw with USA Today, where USA Today you can see a lot of photographs and a lot of small tidbits of news. On the contrary, we see the New York Times, it has a big masthead. Of course, they're trying to promote the subscription, but they also use photographs, but very minimally, so that just kind of gets attention. But then more space is set aside for text. For instance, look at the concept: political pitfalls litter any path Obama may take for court, and cruise before court. So basically, it's kind of involves a lot of political news and a lot of news that kind of affects the United States. And again, it has got various columns like on politics, business, opinion, technology, science, and again, it's a kind of lifestyle. And again, a lot of newspaper even promotes some fun stuff like crossword. I remember one of my friends' mom, she reads newspaper not for the content but plays Sudoku and crossword. I thought that was funny because she actually looks forward for that newspaper every day just to play crossword and Sudoku. So the next one is the Wall Street Journal. Again, this is considered to be a financial newspaper, and it was established way back in 1889, and it has kind of a good readership base. And again, if you look at the readers of Wall Street Journal, they are very sophisticated, and their annual income is about $150,000. So naturally, if you look at the advertisement, it will be more towards people who has money. See, for instance, you won't you will have someone like Porsche or Corvette or BMW promoting their ads in Wall Street Journal rather than in USA Today, because they know where the affluential readers are and how to reach that particular market segment. So these are the top three newspapers. And look at Wall Street Journal. It's completely, see, at least in New York Times, you saw a little bit of photos here and there. But if you look at Wall Street Journal, they give more importance for text. They want to kind of maintain this pre-Pulitzer feel for the newspapers, where they give more importance for text and they don't believe in photographs or any kind of jazzy stuff. But as you can see, the one common thread that you saw in all the newspapers, whether it's New York Times or USA Today or Wall Street Journal, they are trying to promote themselves in big way. Subscribe now, you have a special offer, because they want to reach out to more market. And as obviously this content is more geared towards finance and business. And look at, they're talking about OPEC presses Iran and Iraq to limit crude oil output. It talks about the US stock market and Nasdaq and all the other stuff. So obviously Wall Street Journal is more for an affluential reader, and the advertisements are also for upscale market as well. So just to kind of put things in perspective, that's why I showed you the three screenshots, so that you can have a better understanding that the readers and the target audience is completely different for these three markets. And one of the important take-home message for this day should be like, newspapers are great medium for advertisement. And I think there are some newspapers, it's just a rough range. It ranges from 60% to 80% is set aside for advertisement. So if you look at newspapers, you think, oh, I'm getting information, I'm getting a lot of helps about various aspects that's happening around my community and all that. It's fine. But if you look closely at any newspapers, 65% average is set aside for advertising. That's a big chunk. But right now I think they're even looking at 70 to 80% in terms of content set aside for advertisement. I think that is a big deal, and that's how we are kind of moving towards, because newspaper don't make money by the sales of newspaper on stands or in retail outlets. They mainly make their money through advertisement, and that is how they survive. And that is how they actually stay in the market. And newspaper is considered to be an advertiser's medium, because most of the newspaper readers are white collared, they're educated, and they have an average median income of about $100,000. And it's also great for local merchants. For instance, when you're looking at the top newspapers, obviously they're going to have ads from Procter and Gamble, or some big car dealers, or some people with big money. But there are many suburban dailies and local ethnic newspapers where they try to kind of tap the local market. For instance, when you look at local newspaper, there's something called there's something called Trinity report, where they mainly focus on high school sports and obituaries and police blotters. And that's a great thing for the local merchants as well. For instance, you can have some coupons or about some local stores and grocery stores. That is still a great medium to reach among the local newspapers. So definitely newspapers are a boon for local merchants. And also it just gives you a lot of features about the local market, which is missing in the national market. For instance, you might be from Westchester, and if you read New York Times, you might get a world view of what's happening. But actually speaking, news is all about proximity, what's happening around us, and that's what is happening. There are a lot of local newspapers that give a lot of space for local advertisement and stuff like that. And also, there are some of the disturbing trends is, in 1923 we had about 523 cities that had two or more competing newspapers. But right now we see about maybe like 20 cities are only competing newspapers, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's very very dicey situation for the newspaper industry to survive. This statistics gives you the falling figure of the newspaper in terms of the numbers. In around 1980s, it was about 1730 newspapers, but right now it's actually about like around like 1330 newspapers. So definitely you can see the graph is actually definitely going down, which actually tells about the newspaper state as well. And one of the single reason for the downfall of newspaper is something that will be hard for you to comprehend. Let me guess. Okay, one website, only one website pulled down the entire newspaper industry. Can you guess what is that? It's Craigslist. You might think, what's that? Craigslist just classified. So newspapers survived on classifieds, but then when Craigslist like launched a free site where people can buy and sell, I think that completely took away the classified market from newspapers, and a lot of newspapers lost billions of dollars just through a single site called the Craigslist. So all the internet kind of completely affected the newspapers as well, and a lot of people shut down. And also with technology, a lot of people also lost their jobs, because in a typical newspaper we had something like typographers and printers who were there, who had to oversee and all that. But with the technology and the sophistication of machines, all these jobs were become redundant, and a lot of people lost their jobs as well. But then they also kind of compensated with like digital illustrators and graphic designers and all that, but still it took away a lot of jobs as well. So those are some of the reasons that contributed for the downfall of newspapers, but still newspapers have survived. It has its beginning in 1690, and still it has relevance today, but then not as much as it used to be. But they're trying ways to adapt itself. For instance, this is a term called hyper commercialism, where many newspapers, as I told you, like 60 to 80% is set aside for content, but they are ready to even sell the main page for ads, which was kind of a marketing gimmick. But then it kind of, that's how newspaper is trying to survive in this ever changing landscape. And some people kind of look at it in a very bad way, because people, when look at newspaper front page for important news information and see some random advertisement, they might pretty much get annoyed by it. But it is what it is, there is no other. And for instance, Los Angeles Times, one of the top 5 newspaper in this country, and most of the times give some full page, main page ad, and they make a lot of money out of this in the process. But then they are trying to kind of survive because of the onslaught of the internet and the availability of information. So everything kinds of feed into it, and they're trying ways to kind of market. I'm talking about even big paper like USA Today and New York Times. You can see it's not as prominent as Los Angeles Times, but sometimes they also do sometimes a front page full ad as well. As you can see, they have Progressive has taken the complete last bottom of the USA Today. New York Times is setting aside a little bit of the content for alcohol ads, and similarly Southland, LA Times. So this is what we call it as hyper commercialism, where we talk about how ads are being sold on front page of the newspaper, where it's considered used to be the exclusive place for news and information. So that's the situation that we see in many of the newspapers, and it's all about survival. And other important aspect is we also need to look at convergence, because see, convergence is nothing but it's kind of shows you the coming together of the communication industries, the electronic industries, and the computer industry. It's all coming together, because earlier, for instance, if I have to read a newspapers, I have to go physically get a newspaper and read it. But with the availability of mobile platforms, with availability of tablets and laptops and desktops, and with also the development that's happening in the field of the internet and the browsers, we are able to access all these content online. So again, this is what is convergence, because it's the melding of the communication industry, the electronic industry, and the computer industry. And earlier it was all separate industries, but now it's all kind of converging and coming together, making all these things possible, which was not possible few years back. And for instance, information availability has become so easy that you can practically get any information online. And you must be wondering, like, why should I pay this content when I can get this for free? That's the natural, because people don't want to pay for any online content at all, because that is the very psyche of online medium. Because right from the beginning, people didn't have to pay any money to access online stuff. All of a sudden now you say, like, okay, you've been reading for free, but from henceforth you better pay money and read my stuff. People don't want to do that, and still they're trying to market. I think this is all about going back how mass media is profit center. Newspapers are trying to kind of make as much as money as possible. And again, with so much of availability of information and content on the online medium, why should people buy your stuff? So you have to be really, really exclusive and really good for people to be a premium subscriber for your information. And that's what is called paywall. Because many newspapers, for instance USA Today, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, or New York Post or Washington Post, you can read all the information, the main newspaper, for free. But if you want to access an article in detail, or if you want to go back to an archive, they want you to pay money, and that's called paywall. Because again, paywall is a concept that we need to keep in mind. It's all about profit centered, it's all about making money. And also they can give you free content, but then if you want more important exclusive content, you have to invariably shell money to access those content. And the second thing is, well, online, I think there's so much of information, we really don't know which one is true and which one is false. And again, a lot of websites are now ripping content from across the board and trying to promote as if it's their own content. And one such example is BuzzFeed. Okay, BuzzFeed doesn't it's not a newspaper by itself, but then it kind of pulls in information from across the board and then presents as if it's a new content. And still they are known for viral news sites, where they try to kind of kind of get some catchy news articles, so that people are kind of glued about what's happening. I had a friend from Malaysia. He's doing PhD in curriculum and instruction. He was telling me, man, did you read this news, man? How four women got pregnant in a swimming pool. Like, man, what are you talking about, man? This guy believed in news, saying, oh, this is news, this really happened. A guy who was in a pool, and there were women who were swimming in the same pool. They got pregnant because of the guy. And this is completely, when you look at this itself, we know, if you're in news field, definitely it's not definitely not a credible news. But then a lot of people fall for that, and that's the reason that we need to pay close attention to these kind of news content, how to kind of decipher whether the content is true or not. It's a completely big topic itself. I can do it at some point, but basically always look at the source of news. How credible is the news organization? How credible is the news reporter? And is there any way where we can get in touch with the organization or the reporter? If none of this is available, then it's highly likely that content may be fake. But anyway, there are a lot of news aggregators that kind of promote, that kind of cull news from across the news board and promote as if it's their news. And one of the news aggregators which I use is called Google News, which is news.google.com. It pretty much pulls in all the trending news from across the online medium and kind of brings it to me and pops it and shows what is the most important trending news in the world, and what's most important trending news in US, and what's most important trending news in technology and science, etc. So that's how we see. So I want you to look at how newspapers are profit centered. Going back to what we discussed in class, I also want you to put the things that you read from the chapters and what we discussed in the class, and analyze how newspapers are managing to survive, and what extent they go to kind of make money and stuff like that. And I'll also look at how technological changes has affected the production, delivery, and distribution of newspapers, and also look at how newspaper affects politics, society, and culture. And again, for instance, how some newspapers are still a great medium. For instance, I don't know how many of you are aware of this Flint water crisis. It was an investigative journalist from Michigan. Actually, he kind of highlighted the importance of that particular Flint water issue. So newspapers is still a great medium, but unfortunately nobody is kind of paying good journalists anymore. Nowadays all is bothered is about how many clicks their news headlines are getting. They don't bother about the content of the news stuff. They only bother about how many eyeballs the newspaper news columns are getting. So that's very unfortunate. And when you don't have credible news organizations to run in the country, how can you get credible news or relevant information for you and me? So this is what is very saddening, because we discussed how in the 80s there were about like 1730 newspapers, and right now there are about 1330. The decline of newspapers is bad news for free country, is bad news for democracy, because they say the state houses and the municipalities and the city hall, the number of reporters covering this has completely become so less that there's a lot of room for corruption to happen. So which means invariably all the politicians are kind of abusing the taxpayers money. If you don't have good journalists who are going to report on this kind of issues, then what happens to the state of the country? So these are some of the things that we have to put things in perspective. If they don't cover some of the important events in the country, why will that affect you and me? It's because everybody is concerned about what's happening in the life of celebrity. It's fine because it's natural to know about what's happening, but at the same time we also need to have a nose for news in terms of what happens in the field of politics. If we have corrupt people, if we have like people with no sense of the understanding the importance of governance, and taking the people for granted is at the helm of affairs, what happens to a country? So for instance, we are talking about the gay and lesbian issue right now as if it's nothing, but at one point in time it was very difficult to even write a article about them, because it was kind of looked down upon. So it took a lot of effort by the people in the newspaper industry to cover on certain issues again and again, so as to get some kind of attention from mainstream media. And also right now we are living in a time where gay marriage has been legalized, and it did not happen overnight. And thanks to newspapers, because they covered the sensitivity and the importance of these issues for a very very long time, until it has come to our mainstream agenda, and we kind of acknowledge the need to kind of give some kind of recognition for this particular case or topic in this country. So again, so I want you to critically look at this newspaper from these three lenses: how newspaper is profit centered, how tech changes has affected production, delivery, and distribution, how newspaper affects politics, society, and culture. So I think that'll be a good exercise, and I'm going to post the test on D2L. Please submit it by the end of the day. And I'm also going to be posting a lot of information about other assignments shortly in the next couple of days, so watch out for that as well.